Please join me in the prayer of preparation. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. I don't even think it's possible to communicate to you all how good it is to be with you today. It's my first time here since the pandemic hit the US over 2 years ago, and I've missed you. And I thank you for inviting me to worship today and to preach from the lectionary. Oh, yeah, take this off. Thank you. Thank you. I work at a hospital, so I'm in this all day, and I'm not even used to taking it off. Okay. So on this day, our text proclaims stories about the wild, wild Spirit of God. But it's also Ascension Sunday, Ascension Day on the Christian calendar, when we remember Jesus leaving his disciples and ascending into heaven to be with God. And to top that off, it's our country's Memorial Day weekend, when we honor and remember those who gave their lives as a sacrifice for us, for what we value. Somehow, I think there is a connection between today's biblical story about God's active intervention in lives and those who still wait for God's intervention, as the disciples waited for Pentecost, and those who embody God's Spirit in their actions of love for others. Lately, as you all have alluded to and mentioned, we're experiencing devastating communal grief, with those mourning the senseless deaths of their loved ones by gun violence, Buffalo, Laguna Woods, and Uvalde, Texas. In less than 2 weeks, people were shot in a church, in an elementary school, and in a grocery store. So far in 2022, in our country, so far in 2022, there have been 212 mass shootings. We hear of a few. This means 4 or more people killed at one time. In the hospital where I work as a chaplain, our trauma center has seen a 55% increase in people with gunshot wounds over the past 3 years. And all of this on top of divisive political turmoil, racial injustice, the effects of global warming, and a pandemic that has destroyed the lives of millions. People's lives are forever changed. And if we're being aware and honest, we've all changed in many ways as a result of the events in the last couple of years. We're filled to overflowing with grief. Our mental health is deeply affected. Sometimes I think we can't sustain this. I try to stay connected to God for strength. And I guess what I've learned is that life is fragile again. I've learned that again, and how everything can change on a dime, and how precious the simple things are. Nature, being with people we love, having a good conversation, sharing a meal. As followers of Jesus Christ, we wait. We try to take action. We weep. We wonder. We worry. Barbara Brown Taylor writes that Ascension Day, one of the most forgotten feast days of the church year, is the day that 11 people, with nothing but a promise and a prayer, consented to becoming the church. For while they stood still with their necks cranked up, gobsmacked, wondering what the heck was going on, they were given the message: stop looking up. Better to look around instead, at each other, at the world, at the ordinary people in their lives, because that's where they were most likely to find Christ. Not in the way they used to know him, but the new way. Not in his own body, but in their bodies. The risen, the ascended Lord who was no longer anywhere on earth, so that he could be everywhere instead. So, in the context of the bad news of our world, I just recounted, I read our lectionary text in Acts 16, and I thought, oh no, a miracle story of how everything worked out all right and God cleared a way for change to happen. This is not the experience of most people these days. But here we are in the book of Acts today. The book itself is filled with wild, wild acts of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is the living, active God present among us now, moving and changing people, changing events, as powerful and as unpredictable as the wind. In the book of Acts, which is part 2 of the physician Luke's gospel, we learn of the missionary journeys of the followers of God, and there's a plethora of stories of people's conversion experiences. There's a decisive message about God's salvation being open for all people, not just Jewish people, but Gentiles as well. That was radical. And if you feel a bit uncomfortable about my calling the Holy Spirit wild, recall with me some of the conversion stories in Acts, all the inverting of the values and the leading of followers through uncharted territories. We'll be celebrating Pentecost next Sunday with its mighty winds, flames, and gift of languages so that all could hear the gospel, which led to thousands being baptized. And then how about this story? The Jewish leader Saul, a persecutor of Christians, being struck blind, meeting Jesus, studying for 3 years, and then becoming the apostle to the Gentiles. And what about the sheet of animals coming down from the heavens before Peter to teach him that God accepts all people? As the Gentile Cornelius and his family were given the gift of the Holy Spirit, and the way was set for the gospel to spread to the ends of the earth. And then right before our story, there's the story of the God-fearing, wealthy businesswoman Lydia, who's converted and starts a church in her home in Philippi. In this Acts 16 story read this morning, Paul and Silas have plans that once again get changed by the wild, wild Spirit of God. They're followed around by a slave girl who has a spirit of divine prophecy in her. Her owners exploit her and make a lot of money off of her fortune telling. She sees Paul and Silas for who they are, and she proclaims it. But they ignore the slave girl and her proclamation for days. Then the text says Paul gets annoyed by her. So to silence her, he drives the spirit from her. Now, I have so many questions about Paul's actions here. I think, why didn't Paul drive the evil spirits out of the men who held her captive and used her and made money off of her? I also asked, why didn't Paul want the slave girl, making known his identity and purpose as a slave of God, proclaiming God's salvation? Is it because she was a woman and their misguided, misogynistic world wanted to silence a woman's voice? We don't know the answer to these questions, but we do know Paul didn't treat her with respect and did not seem to truly care about her fate and was annoyed with her. This stands in stark contrast to the relationship, to Paul's relationship with the man I'm going to call Jimmy, who is a jailer. He's a prison guard in our story. Because they drove the spirit from the slave girl, Paul and Silas get publicly beaten with rods and thrown into jail after unfair accusations and no trial. They were imprisoned because they upset the status quo and the profits of the men who were exploiting the slave girl. While in the depths of prison with shackled feet, Paul and Silas began to pray and sing hymns to God. And at this point, I'd like to focus on Jimmy the jailer's experience. It was his job to probably participate in Paul and Silas's unfair treatment and public beating. His job, his livelihood, and his life perhaps depended upon it. And like all the prisoners Jimmy guarded, he probably didn't trust those he was guarding in jail. He looked at them as dangerous and as other. Jimmy likely heard Paul and Silas praying and singing, just as the other prisoners heard it. And my guess is that he probably had never heard such a thing in prison before. Jimmy may have wondered how they were praising God or even addressing God in prayer. I imagine, though, Paul and Silas, I imagine them singing songs of lament rather than something fell. I don't know what it was. Sorry. Rather than singing praise hymns. Either way, God was being addressed in their distress. And those who heard it were likely moved by it, or at the very least, curious. Then came the earthquake in the middle of the night. Earthquakes are not uncommon, but the earthquake that happened was seemingly from God's hand as it tore open the prison doors and unshackled the prisoners. This sent Jimmy the jailer into despair. He knew he may be killed by the prisoners or by his boss. He would be shamed and unable to work again. So he took his life in his own hands and was about to kill himself when he heard Paul's voice. Don't hurt yourself. We're all here. You're not alone. We're with you. Instead of killing himself, Jimmy rushed in and fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. He brought them outside and asked what he must do to be saved. And they told Jimmy about God's salvation, belief in Jesus. Then Jimmy the jailer risked inviting Paul and Silas over to his home with his family. Jimmy washed the wounds that he helped create. Paul and Silas then washed Jimmy and his family through baptism. They all ate together like a family, shared pain, promise of companionship, mutual cleansing, feasting on the word and at the table. Jimmy, the jailer, was a changed person. Later, he ends up defending Paul and Silas before the Roman leaders who learned that they had falsely imprisoned Roman citizens. The corrupt leaders apologized and freed Paul and Silas. And I imagine Jimmy the jailer and his family became part of Lydia's house church. If Jimmy remained as a prison guard, I imagine he treated prisoners differently and stood up to unjust leaders more. That's my hope. The turning point of Jimmy the jailer's life was when Paul and Silas risked staying with the jailer, the one who beat and imprisoned them unjustly, the one who was about to kill himself out of fear and shame. Jimmy risked believing Paul and Silas and must have felt that he was not alone. He had companionship in his pain, that he could make right his wrongs. They all overcame their fears of the other and mutually washed each other's wounds. And one writer says they were baptized into each other's pain and woundedness. And as a sign of their shared humanity and bond with each other, they engaged in table fellowship, which is the ultimate sign of acceptance and solidarity. They knew that they were in this life together. This is much like our human solidarity and radical trust every time we celebrate communion together, as we will do today. As we eat the bread and drink the cup, we remember that God stays with us and calls us to do so for each other. God says to us, I'm with you. You are not alone. And we say to each other, I'm with you. You're not alone. God risked becoming flesh in Jesus and entrusts us to continue God's work of love to a hurting world. How will God's love be made known if not through our bodies, our unity, our respectful treatment of the vulnerable among us? In our weariness from the dystopia and pain around us, where do we find the strength to do this, to go on? The book of Acts shows us over and over again it's through a power within us and beyond us, the power of God's Holy Spirit. Through the strength of God's Spirit, we can trust in the humanity of others. We can risk staying with those who are different than us or whom we fear. We can mask up. We can vaccinate. We can demand common sense gun laws. We can stand against politics that hurt the poor and the vulnerable. We can stand against racial injustice. We can stand up for women's reproductive health. And through the strength of God's Spirit, we can sit with people in grief. We know God's Holy Spirit is working in and among us whenever we experience any kind of joy or love or peace or patience, any kind of kindness, goodness, generosity, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control, bravery, and purity. Those are the gifts of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is our teacher. The Holy Spirit is our comforter and is our intercessor who empowers, guides, and leads, equips, and reveals. So you may ask me, where is this Holy Spirit in this season of lament? Where is our earthquake? When will the doors open and we'll be set free? And I'd say the Holy Spirit is there in our tears and lament. The living God is with us and is more outraged and more sad than we are. Maybe the Holy Spirit is there in our moments of strength and courage that we get in the midst of the chaos, much like our veterans who died for our sakes, much like Dr. John Chang, who gave his life to save some of those in the church in Orange County. Maybe the Holy Spirit can help us remember past times. God has helped us and gives us trust that God can do so again. Maybe it's in the glimpses of hope we sometimes have when we imagine how things could have been different. What if, like Jimmy the jailer, the murderer of George Floyd had taken his knee off George's neck and apologized, listened to George's story, invited George into his home, washed his wounds, and fed him? Where is the Holy Spirit in this season of lament? If we look to Jesus on the cross, we see that death is not the last word, that love is more powerful than death. Just as Jesus knew he'd be raised, we too, as followers, are promised that same resurrection power. It's in us. We feel it now only in part and trust that we'll experience it fully later. That is the promise of the gospel. Is this resurrection hope, this wild, wild spirit, what enables us to sing in prison, to wait with our oppressor, to invite our enemy into our home and wash their wounds and feed them, to share the gospel with them and baptize them? Does God's Spirit enable us to see with the eyes of our hearts that the weak are actually the powerful, and the powerful are weak? Is this what enables me to be with people I serve in the hospital who are so scared, so sad, even if I disagree with their medical decisions? Is this where we get the strength to stand up to those who treat others unjustly and use politics of fear to threaten those who would disrupt the status quo and their economic interests? Is it God's Holy Spirit who will compel us to not rest until we fight for laws that will better protect and respect our children? Maybe this. Are we God's earthquake who loosen the chains of others by treating the vulnerable with respect? May God forgive us and enable us to trust enough to stay with people in pain, to wash wounds, to share stories, and to be companions around God's table, empowered by God's wild, wild spirit. Amen.